The Empire had never lost a war. They had never retreated from a battle. They had never met a species that could stand against them for more than a few weeks. For 3,000 years, they moved through the galaxy like a slow and terrible storm, destroying everything in their path and taking whatever they wanted from the ashes. Their ships were black as night and shaped like blades. Millions of them moved together through the empty void between stars, blocking out the light of distant suns whenever they passed. They themselves were tall creatures with gray skin and 4 eyes that saw everything in shades of red. They believed they were the only species in the universe worthy of survival. Every other race existed only to serve them or to die. Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, a massive vessel called the Endless Dominion. He watched as another world burned below him. This planet had belonged to a species called the. They had been peaceful traders who built beautiful cities and created art that other civilizations traveled across the galaxy to see. Now their cities were craters and their art was dust. The few survivors would spend the rest of their lives as slaves in mining camps. Felt nothing as he watched the destruction. He had seen this scene so many times that it no longer held any meaning for him. Conquest had become as routine as eating breakfast. His tactical officer approached with a data tablet. The officer was young and eager, still excited by the work of empire. Remembered feeling that way once, many centuries ago. The feeling had faded long before the officer was born. "Commander, we have identified our next target," the officer said. "A species in a nearby system. They call themselves humans." Took the tablet and looked at the information. A single inhabited planet called Earth. A few small colonies on nearby moons and asteroids. Limited space travel capability. Their technology was primitive compared to the standard. They had only been traveling between stars for about 200 years. "What is their military strength?" asked. "Minimal, Commander. They have a small fleet of warships, but most of their vessels are designed for cargo transport and scientific research. Our intelligence suggests they are a fractured species. They spent most of their history fighting among themselves before they finally united to explore space." Almost smiled. A species that wasted time fighting itself instead of conquering others. How pathetic. How typical of the lesser races. "Anything else?" "They have one warship stationed at their outer colony, a place called Haven's Rest. It appears to be a mining operation. 12,000 civilians, one military vessel." "One ship," repeated. He found this amusing. One ship to protect an entire colony. These humans clearly did not understand how the universe worked. They would learn soon enough. "Prepare the vanguard fleet," ordered. 50,000 ships should be sufficient to crush their outer defenses and clear a path to there. I want this species conquered within the week. I grow tired of these simple victories." The tactical officer saluted and hurried away to relay the orders. Turned back to and watched the last of the cities collapse into rubble. Soon the humans would share this fate. Soon their world would burn just like all the others. Across the galaxy, the vanguard fleet assembled. 50,000 warships formed into attack formations and prepared to enter. Their commanders had done this hundreds of times before. They expected no real resistance. They expected the humans to surrender or die within hours of the first shots being fired. None of them knew that this conquest would be different. None of them understood what waited for them at the edge of human space. At the colony of Haven's Rest, life continued as normal. Miners worked in the asteroid fields, extracting precious metals that would be shipped back to Earth. Engineers maintained the equipment that kept everyone alive in the cold emptiness of space. Families lived in the underground habitats, raising children who had never seen a blue sky or felt natural sunlight on their faces. Captain Jake sat in his quarters aboard the USS Defiance, reading a book about ancient naval battles on Earth. He was 53 years old with gray hair and lines on his face that came from decades of hard service. He had joined the United Earth Navy when he was 23, and had never seriously considered any other life. The Defiance was a Sentinel-class heavy cruiser. She was not the ship in the fleet, but she was solid and reliable, had commanded her for 7 years and knew every sound she made, every quirk in her systems. The ship had a crew of 47, all of them experienced officers and enlisted personnel who had served together long enough to work as a single unit. Looked up from his book when his communicator beeped. "Captain, this is Lieutenant Commander. You need to come to the bridge immediately." Lisa was his executive officer. She was 15 years younger than, a tall woman with short brown hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She was not the type to call him to the bridge without good reason. Set down his book and made his way through the narrow corridors of the ship. When he arrived on the bridge, he found standing at the sensor station with an expression he had never seen on her face before. It looked like fear. "What do we have?" he asked. Pointed at the screen, looked at the sensor readings and felt his stomach drop. 50,000 contacts, all of them warships, all of them heading directly toward Haven's Rest at high speed. "How long until they arrive?" asked. His voice was calm, but inside his mind was racing. 4 hours, sir." Looked around the bridge. His crew was watching him, waiting for orders. They had trained for combat situations, but nothing like this. No one trained for odds of 50,000 to 1. "Get me a channel to the colony," said, "and wake up everyone who is sleeping. We have work to do." He did not know yet exactly what he was going to do. He only knew that he was not going to run, and he was not going to surrender. Those 12,000 civilians in the colony below were counting on him. He would find a way to protect them, or he would die trying. The message went out to the colony administrator, a woman named Karen who had spent 20 years building Haven's Rest into a thriving community. When she heard the news, she did not panic. She simply asked what she could do to help. Told her to begin evacuation procedures immediately. Every transport ship, every shuttle, every vessel that could carry passengers needed to launch within the hour. They would head for the nearest safe system and pray they could outrun the enemy fleet. As the colony scrambled to evacuate, looked at the sensor screen one more time. 50,000 enemy ships, 1 human warship. The math was impossible, but Captain Jake had never been very good at math. He was much better at being stubborn. The evacuation of Haven's Rest began within 20 minutes of the alert. Colony Administrator Karen had drilled her people for emergencies many times, but she had always imagined fires or equipment failures or asteroid impacts. She had never imagined an alien invasion fleet of 50,000 warships. Transport ships lifted off from the colony landing pads one after another. Families crowded into cargo holds designed for mineral ore. Children cried and parents tried to comfort them while pretending they were not terrified themselves. The miners left their equipment behind. The engineers abandoned projects they had worked on for years. Everyone took only what they could carry. Captain watched the evacuation from the bridge of the Defiance. Lieutenant Commander stood beside him, calculating numbers on her data tablet. "Even if we get everyone loaded in time, those transports are too slow," she said quietly. "The enemy fleet will catch them before they reach the jump point 2. "I know," replied. "Then what is the plan, sir?" Turned to face her. They had served together for 5 years. He trusted her more than almost anyone else in his life. She deserved the truth. "The plan is that we stay here and hold them off. We buy time for the transports to escape. Every minute we delay that fleet is another minute for those families to get farther away." Stared at him. She understood what he was saying. He was not talking about a fighting retreat. He was not talking about a delaying action that ended with their escape. He was talking about a last stand. "How long would we need to hold them?" she asked. "At least 3 hours, maybe 4. "Against 50,000 ships." "Yes." Was silent for a long moment, then she nodded slowly. "I should inform the crew." "No," said, "I will tell them myself. They deserve to hear it from me, and I will not order anyone to stay. This has to be their choice." He activated the ship-wide communication system. His voice echoed through every corridor and compartment of the Defiance. "All hands, this is the captain. By now you have seen the sensor readings. You know what is coming. In about 3.5 hours, 50,000 enemy warships will arrive at our position. The colony is evacuating, but the transport ships need time to escape. Someone has to stay behind and slow down the enemy fleet." He paused. The ship was completely silent. Every crew member was listening. "I am staying. This ship is staying. But I am not ordering anyone else to remain. If you want to board one of the evacuation shuttles, you have my blessing and my respect. No one will think less of you. This is not a battle we can win. This is a battle we can only fight long enough to give others a chance to live." Waited. He expected at least some of his crew to request transfer to the evacuation shuttles. These were intelligent people with families and futures. They had every reason to want to survive. No one moved, no one spoke, no one requested transfer. After a full minute of silence, Chief Engineer Drake's voice came over the intercom from the engine room. "Captain, with respect, you talk too much. Some of us have work to do down here. These engines are not going to tune themselves." Felt something catch in his throat. He had served with Drake for 7 years. The man was 60 years old with hands from decades of working on starship machinery. He had a wife back on Earth and 3 he talked about constantly. "Understood, Chief, carry on." One by one, the other crew members checked in from their stations. Weapons, navigation, sensors, communications, medical, damage control. All 47 people aboard the Defiance confirmed they were staying. Lieutenant Amy at the weapons station spoke up. "Captain, I have been running simulations on the enemy fleet composition. Their ships are larger and more heavily armed than ours, but they are not designed for close combat. They are built to overwhelm enemies with numbers and firepower from a distance." "What are you suggesting?" asked. "If we can get close to them, use the asteroid field for cover, we can negate some of their numerical advantage. They will not be able to bring all their weapons to bear at once, and in close quarters, our smaller size becomes an advantage rather than a weakness." Looked at the tactical display. The asteroid field near Haven's Rest was dense and chaotic, full of rocks ranging from pebbles to mountains. Flying through it would be extremely dangerous, but was right. It would give them a fighting chance. "Navigation, plot a course to the asteroid field. We will meet them there." Helmsman Reeves nodded and began working on the course. He was the youngest officer on the bridge, only 26 years old, but he could fly the Defiance like she was an extension of his own body. "Weapons, I want all systems charged and ready. Load with armor-piercing rounds. Prepare nuclear warheads on the missile tubes." "Aye, Captain," replied. Her fingers moved across her console with practiced speed. Looked at the sensor display again. The enemy fleet was still 3 hours away. 3 hours to prepare. 3 hours to say goodbye to everything they knew. Lieutenant Commander moved closer to him and spoke quietly so the others could not hear. "Jake, are you sure about this?" Turned to look at her. They rarely used first names on the bridge, but protocol seemed less important now. "No," he admitted. "I am not sure about anything, but I know that 12,000 people are counting on us. I know that running away is not an option I can live with, and I know that if we are going to die today, we are going to die fighting." Nodded, she reached out and squeezed his arm briefly. "Then let us make it count." The hours passed slowly. The crew prepared for battle with quiet efficiency. Drake and his engineers reinforced critical systems and prepared emergency repair protocols. Ran weapons diagnostics and calculated firing solutions for 100 different scenarios. Reeves memorized the asteroid field layout until he could navigate it with his eyes closed. Walked through the ship, visiting every section, speaking to every crew member. He shook hands and shared stories and thanked people for their service. He did not make any speeches about glory or duty. He simply told them the truth, that they were good people and he was proud to serve with them. When he returned to the bridge, the enemy fleet was 30 minutes away. 50,000 black shapes on the sensor screen, moving toward them like a swarm of angry insects. Sat in his command chair and took a deep breath. "All stations report ready," announced. Good looked at where the distant stars shone peacefully against the blackness of space. Soon that peace would be shattered. Soon this small patch of the universe would become a battlefield. "Let them come," he said quietly. "We will show them what humans are made of." Vanguard fleet dropped out of imperfect formation. 50,000 warships arranged in attack patterns that had conquered 400 worlds. Their commanders expected to see a panicked colony and perhaps a few fleeing transports that they would destroy for sport. Instead, they saw a single human warship positioned directly in their path. The vessel was tiny compared to their fleet, like a single ant standing before an army of giants. Its weapons were charged and its shields were raised. Commander received the report on his flagship many light years away. He smiled when he heard it. One ship. These humans were sending one ship to face his entire Vanguard fleet. It was either the bravest or the thing he had ever heard. "Destroy them," he ordered through the communication link. "Make it quick." 300 warships broke formation and moved to engage the Defiance. They fired their weapons in unison, sending a wall of plasma and missiles toward the human vessel. The combined firepower was enough to destroy a small moon. The Defiance was not there when the shots arrived. Captain had anticipated the opening attack. The moment he saw the enemy weapons charging, he gave the order to move. Helmsman Reeves threw the ship into a hard lateral burn that pushed the crew against their restraints. The Defiance shot sideways like a startled fish, dodging the incoming fire by meters. "Return fire," ordered. Lieutenant Amy had already locked onto the lead enemy ships. The Defiances thundered, sending dense metal slugs across the void at incredible speed. The slugs punched through shields and armor like they were made of paper. 2 enemy ships exploded in cascades of flame and debris. They hesitated. They had expected the human ship to be destroyed in the first volley. They had not expected it to survive, let alone fight back effectively. That hesitation cost them dearly. "Take us into the asteroid field," commanded. "Full speed." Reeves pushed the engines to maximum. The Defiance raced toward the dense cluster of space rocks, weaving between the first tumbling boulders as plasma bolts scorched the space around them. The ships followed, but their larger size made them slower and less agile. Inside the asteroid field, everything changed. They could not use their numerical advantage. They could not form attack patterns or concentrate their fire. The rocks blocked their sensors and their weapons. Their ships collided with asteroids while trying to maneuver. The Defiance moved through the chaos like a ghost. Reeves had memorized every rock, every gap, every path through the field. He flew the ship with impossible precision, sliding between boulders that seemed certain to crush them. Watched the tactical display and waited for opportunities. When a group of enemy ships clustered together to avoid a large asteroid, he gave the order to fire. When a vessel exposed its vulnerable engines while turning, put a missile into it. When enemy ships tried to predict the Defiance's path, Reeves changed direction in ways that logic. The hours blurred together into a continuous storm of weapons fire and desperate maneuvers. Lost track of how many times they should have died. A plasma bolt that missed the bridge by inches. A collision with an asteroid that somehow only grazed the hull. An enemy missile that detonated just meters away from the engine compartment. Chief Engineer Drake performed miracles below decks. Every time a system failed, he brought it back online. Every time the hull took damage, his teams patched it within minutes. He crawled through burning compartments and sealed breaches with his bare hands when the equipment failed. Shields at 40%, reported. Hull breaches on decks 3, 5, and 7. 12 crew members injured, 3 dead. Felt each death like a physical blow. He had known those people. He had talked to them just hours ago. "How long have we been fighting?" he asked. 3 hours and 27 minutes. 3.5 hours. The transports should be reaching the jump point by now. Every minute from this point forward was borrowed time. Enemy fleet status. We have destroyed or disabled approximately 400 enemy vessels. 49,600 remain combat effective. 400 ships. One human warship had destroyed 400 enemy vessels. It was impossible, it was absurd, and it was not enough. The commanders had finally adapted to the asteroid field. They stopped trying to chase the Defiance through the rocks. Instead, they surrounded the field and began systematically destroying the asteroids themselves, clearing a path inward. Watched the tactical display as his hiding places disappeared one by one. The enemy was learning. The enemy was adjusting. Soon there would be nowhere left to run. "Captain," said, her voice strained but steady, "weapons systems are at 12% effectiveness. We have exhausted our missile supply, are overheating." "Engines are failing," Drake reported from the engine room. His voice was hoarse from breathing smoke. "I can give you maybe 30 more minutes of maneuvering capability. After that, we are dead in the water." Looked around the bridge. His crew was exhausted and wounded. The ship was falling apart around them. They had done everything humanly possible and more. But the enemy fleet was still there. Thousands upon thousands of black warships closing in for the kill. "Sir," said quietly, "the last transport just entered. They made it. All 12,000 civilians are safe." Closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about the families in those transports, the children who would grow up because of what the Defiance had done today, the future that had been purchased with blood and sacrifice. When he opened his eyes, he felt at peace. "All hands, this is the captain. We have accomplished our mission. The colony has been evacuated. Everyone we came here to protect is safe." He paused, looking at the faces of his crew. They were tired and scared and hurt, but they were still fighting, still standing at their posts. "I know we are not going to survive this battle. I know the odds are impossible, but I want you to know that what we did here today mattered. We proved that humanity does not run. We proved that we fight for each other, even when the cost is everything. And I believe that when people hear about what happened here, they will remember us. They will remember that 47 people stood against 50,000 and refused to back down." The fleet had cleared a path through the asteroids. Thousands of warships converged on the crippled Defiance from every direction. "It has been the honor of my life to serve with you," said. "Now let us give them one last fight." The crew responded with a cheer that echoed through the dying ship. They turned back to their stations and prepared for the end. The Defiance charged forward, weapons blazing, heading straight into the heart of the enemy fleet. Commander stood on the bridge of the Endless Dominion and watched the final moments of the human warship. The vessel called Defiance had been reduced to a burning wreck, its hull torn open in a dozen places, flames pouring from every breach. Yet somehow it was still moving, still firing, still fighting. The ship's reactor went critical in the final seconds. The explosion was massive, a burst of light and energy that reached out in all directions. 30 more warships were caught in the blast and destroyed instantly. Then there was silence. The human ship was gone. 430 of his warships were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The battle was over. Had expected to feel satisfaction. He had expected to feel the familiar pleasure of victory that had sustained him through centuries of conquest. Instead, he felt something cold and unfamiliar settling into his chest. He felt fear. One ship, a single primitive vessel crewed by 47 beings, had held off 50,000 of the finest warships in the galaxy for nearly 4 hours. They had fought with tactics he had never seen before. They had displayed courage that bordered on insanity, and they had died without surrendering, without running, without showing any sign of weakness. If one human ship could do this, what could 100 do? What could 1,000? The tactical officer approached nervously. "Commander, the fleet is ready to proceed to the human. Shall I give the order?" Wanted to say yes. Every tradition of the Empire demanded that he press forward and crush these humans before they could organize a proper defense. That was how conquest worked. That was how it had always worked. But for the first time in his long life, hesitated. "How long until we reach there?" he asked. 6 days at standard speed, Commander." 6 days. That would give the humans time to prepare, time to gather their forces, time to learn from what had happened here. "Proceed at maximum speed," ordered. "I want us there in 4 days, and send a message to the Emperor. Tell him that the humans may require a larger force than we anticipated." As the fleet entered, did not know that his victory was already turning to ash. He did not know that the defiance had been broadcasting throughout the entire battle. Every moment of the fight, every impossible maneuver, every act of courage had been transmitted on an open frequency that reached across human space. On Earth, Admiral Shaw stood in the United Earth Command Center and watched the footage of Captain's last stand. The room was filled with the highest-ranking military officers and government leaders of humanity. All of them sat in complete silence as they watched one ship fight 50,000. Admiral Shaw had known Jake for 30 years. They had served together as young officers on the same training vessel. He had been her friend. He had been the godfather to her daughter. Now he was dead, along with 46 other people who had chosen to stay and fight instead of saving themselves. The footage showed the final moments of the battle. The Defiance, burning and broken, charging into the enemy formation one last time. His voice came through the speakers, calm and steady despite everything. "It has been the honor of my life to serve with you." Then the explosion, then silence. Admiral Shaw wiped tears from her eyes and turned to face the assembled leaders. "That was the USS Defiance," she said, her voice steady despite the pain in her heart. 47 crew members against 50,000 enemy warships. They bought 4 hours for 12,000 civilians to escape. They destroyed over 400 enemy vessels, and they did it knowing they would not survive. She activated the main display screen. It showed the current position of the fleet, moving toward Earth at high speed. "Intelligence estimates the enemy will arrive at Earth in approximately 6 days. We have 200 combat vessels ready for immediate deployment. Another 300 can be brought online within the week. Our orbital defense platforms are partially complete. Our ground-based weapon systems are untested against alien technology." She looked around the room at faces filled with fear and uncertainty. "I will not lie to you. The odds are not in our favor. The Empire has conquered hundreds of species. They have millions of warships and thousands of years of military experience. By every reasonable calculation, we should surrender now and hope for mercy." Admiral Shaw straightened her spine and lifted her chin. But Captain and his crew just proved that reasonable calculations do not apply to humans. They proved that we are capable of things that should be impossible. They proved that courage and determination can overcome any odds. She turned to the communications officer. "Broadcast the Defiance's battle record to every colony, every station, every ship, and every home on Earth. Let everyone see what happened at Haven's Rest. Let them see what we are fighting, and let them see that we can fight back." Within hours, the footage spread across human space like wildfire. People watched on their personal screens and on massive public displays in city squares. They watched in homes and factories and schools. They watched the 47 crew members of the Defiance hold the line against an impossible enemy. And something changed. Recruitment centers that had been quiet for years were suddenly overwhelmed with volunteers. People who had never considered military service demanded to enlist. Scientists abandoned their research projects to work on weapons development. Factory workers began pulling double and triple shifts to produce ships and missiles and armor. On the colony of New Phoenix, an old transport captain named Harold Green walked into the military recruiting office and offered his ship and crew for combat duty. When the officer pointed out that his ship was a cargo hauler with no weapons, Green replied that he would strap missiles to the hull himself if he had to. On Earth, a teenager named Park organized her entire neighborhood to collect scrap metal for the war effort. Within a week, her collection drive had spread to every city on the planet. In the orbital shipyards above Mars, Chief Engineer Sandra Cole looked at the half-finished warship she had been building for 3 years and calculated how much faster she could complete it if her team worked around the clock. "Cancel all leave," she told her foreman. "We are finishing this ship in 2 weeks instead of 6 months." "That is impossible," the foreman said. "Tell that to the crew of the Defiance." Across human space, the same scene repeated itself millions of times. People who had never thought about war suddenly found themselves ready to fight. People who had always assumed someone else would protect them decided to protect themselves. People who had been divided by politics and culture and history came together around a single truth. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would not kneel. Humanity would fight. Admiral Shaw watched the reports coming in from every corner of human space and allowed herself a small, grim smile. "Jake," she whispered quietly so no one could hear, "you stubborn fool, you might have just saved us all." She turned back to her command staff and began planning the defense of Earth. The fleet dropped out of above Earth, expecting to find a broken and terrified species ready for conquest. Commander had spent the 4-day journey imagining how quickly the humans would surrender once they saw the full might of his armada. He had prepared speeches for the occasion. He had planned how he would accept their unconditional submission. What he found instead made his blood run cold. 500 human warships were arranged in perfect defensive formation around their planet. Behind them, thousands of civilian vessels had been converted into weapon platforms, their hulls bristling with missiles and orbital defense stations that should have taken years to complete were fully operational, their massive cannons pointed directly at the fleet. The blue and green world called Earth glowed behind this wall of steel and fire, protected by everything humanity could gather in 6 desperate days. "How is this possible?" whispered. His intelligence had told him the humans had only 200 warships. His intelligence had told him their orbital defenses were incomplete. His intelligence had been wrong about everything. His tactical officer was staring at the sensor readings with an expression of pure disbelief. "Commander, they have mobilized their entire species. Those civilian ships are freighters and mining vessels converted to combat duty. Those defense platforms were assembled in less than a week using parts from dozens of different projects. They have pulled everything they have into this one defense." Thought about the Defiance. He thought about 47 humans who had refused to surrender against impossible odds. He had assumed they were an exception. Now he realized they were the rule. A communication request appeared on his screen. The human admiral wanted to speak with him. Accepted the communication. A human female appeared on his. She had gray hair and eyes that burned with cold determination. She wore the uniform of a military commander and stood with the posture of someone who feared nothing. "I am Admiral Shaw of the United Earth Navy," she said. Her voice was calm and measured. "You killed 47 of our people at Haven's Rest. You destroyed the USS Defiance. You thought you had conquered us." She leaned forward and found himself leaning back without meaning to. "You were wrong. Captain and his crew bought us time we used well. Now you face the full strength of humanity, and I want you to understand something about our species. We do not surrender. We do not kneel. We do not break. We fight until we win or until every last one of us is dead." Admiral Shaw paused, letting her words sink in. You have one chance. Turn your fleet around and leave our space forever. Return to your empire and tell them that humanity is not prey. Tell them that if they come here again, we will make them pay in blood for every inch of ground. Or stay and fight, and we will send your broken fleet back to you as a warning to anyone else who thinks humanity is an easy target. Commander stared at the human admiral. In 3,000 years of conquest, no species had ever spoken to a commander this way. No one had ever refused to beg for mercy when faced with overwhelming force. He looked at his tactical displays. His fleet still outnumbered the humans by a significant margin. He had 49,000 warships against their 500-plus converted civilian vessels. By any reasonable calculation, he should still win. But had watched the footage from Haven's Rest. He had seen what 47 humans could do when they refused to give up. Now he was looking at millions of humans who had chosen to stand and fight instead of surrendering. His tactical officer ran projections on the battle. The numbers appeared on his screen and felt his stomach clench. Commander, if we engage the human fleet, we will likely win, but our losses will be catastrophic. The projections estimate we will lose between 60 and 70% of our forces, possibly more. 60 to 70% losses, 30,000 ships destroyed, millions of soldiers killed, and even if they won, they would have to occupy an entire planet full of beings who would never stop fighting back. Thought about what the Emperor would say when he heard these numbers. He thought about the other species watching this conflict from across the galaxy. If the mighty Empire bled itself dry conquering one small planet, would other enslaved races begin to think they could resist too? For the first time in his long career, Commander gave an order that had never been spoken in history. All ships prepare to retreat, set course for home. His bridge crew stared at him in shock. Retreat? The Empire did not retreat. The Empire had never retreated from any battle. Commander, the Emperor will be furious, his tactical officer said. This could be seen as cowardice. The Emperor can come here and fight these humans himself if he wants, replied. I will not sacrifice my fleet for a planet that is not worth the cost. He turned to look at the one last time. Admiral Shaw was still there, waiting for his response. You have won this day, human, said, but do not think this is over. The Empire will return. We will come with larger fleets and more terrible weapons, and next time we will not underestimate you. Admiral Shaw did not smile. We will be ready. And Commander, thank Captain when you meet him in whatever afterlife your kind believes in. He was the one who taught us that we could beat you. The communication ended, gave the final order, and the fleet turned and fled toward. On the bridge of the flagship USS, Admiral Shaw watched the enemy disappear. The ship had been renamed 2 days ago in honor of the man who had started all of this. Around her, the bridge crew was cheering and embracing each other. Admiral, her communications officer said through tears of joy, what do you want to tell the people of Earth? Shaw thought for a moment. She thought about Jake and the 46 crew members who had died with him. She thought about the millions of people who had come together in 6 days to build the fleet that now surrounded their planet. She thought about what this moment meant for humanity and for the galaxy. Tell them that we survived, she said. Tell them that we stood together when it mattered, and tell them that this is just the beginning. The will return and we need to be ready. Start construction on new shipyards, expand the fleet, reach out to other species who have suffered under rule. Today we defended our home. Tomorrow we take the fight to them. She looked out at the stars, at the vast galaxy that suddenly seemed full of possibility instead of threat. And name the new shipyards after the crew of the Defiance. Let everyone who works there remember what 47 people accomplished against impossible odds. Let that be our foundation. Let that be our inspiration. Across the galaxy, enslaved species had watched the confrontation at Earth. They had seen a mighty empire flee from a single planet. They had seen that the conquerors could be defeated. And in 1,000 different languages, on 1,000 different worlds, the same thought began to spread. If the humans could do it, maybe we can too. The age of conquest was ending. The age of human resistance had begun.